The very first death recorded on autopsy for myocardial infarction in America was in 1912.
Wow.
And a single one before that. This is not actually a subtle sign. If you die from myocardial infarction, you see this area of blockage in the vessel, and all the area that it vascularizes is dead and actually visibly looks different. You can see this demarcated line out there. It's like, okay, this dark red damaged heart muscle. Okay, that's dead. It's a very obvious sign. But you can get an arrhythmia from that. Generally, what happens is that now weakened muscle actually ruptures. So there's a big blowout in the wall of the heart. You don't just miss that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a massive blowout and just blood just everywhere. That's not subtle. Or it scars down and then aneurysms out and then ruptures, or just has this big nasty scar and you get an arrhythmia later down because it screws up with electrical circuitry of your cardiac myocytes, and then you have an arrest, right? So all of those things are very clear, visible signs. Not one single documented case before the 1912, and then 10 years later, 20 years later, it's the #1 killer in America, going from just something that no one had ever heard of to the #1 killer in America at the time we were eating the least amount of meat in American history. And people say, well, I actually heard this. There's a guy who he says he's a doctor. I don't know why he would not understand how averages work, but he said that people before that just didn't live long enough to manifest these diseases. Some people say that, well, people were just dying in their 30s. No, they weren't. The average life expectancy from birth was 38. But it's an average, so half were above that, half were below that, and the infant mortality rate was extremely high. Yep. And people do have heart attacks in their 30s. Kids are born with atherosclerosis now, so we can see that. Yep. So no, that's not true. But it doesn't even. So the way they keep statistics are a lot better than just average from birth. They go by, and I have the statistics on my phone. I keep it just for these such occasions that I talk to people like this that don't understand this. It goes by decades, so 1850, 1860, 1870, all the way up to today, and it goes average life expectancy from 0, and then 10, and then 20, and then 30, all the way up to 80, right? So first of all, why would they be keeping statistics on the average life expectancy of someone who gets to the age of 80 if people weren't living to 80, or not many people were living to 80? Oh, it's just an outlier. They don't have it at 90, they don't have it at 100, but they do have it up to 80. So that's plenty of time to develop heart disease. And the average life expectancy from birth in 1850 was 38, but average life expectancy from 10 was 56. And it goes up to 66 and so on. And so if you got to adulthood, you on average would live pretty much as long as you do now.
Well, there's one British stat from Victorian era, which was the 1870s, that if you were a male adult, so you'd already got through the risk of dying at birth, so I can't remember all the data, but it's in the literature. If you're a male adult living in the 1870s, the life expectancy then was longer than it was last year.
Yeah, I would believe it. Absolutely.
And now we've got vaccines, the NHS cures for nearly,
the most technologically advanced we've ever been in human history, the most advanced medical system that has ever existed, and yet we're not doing very well. We're not doing as well as people that didn't have any of this and were just living a more natural lifestyle in the 1800s. So there you go. So people were absolutely living a long time, plenty of time to develop heart disease, and yet we did not see this at the rates that we did, and we were eating a lot more meat. That sort of statement is just ridiculous anyway. They say, we all died in our 30s and we didn't live long enough. Well, I was talking to a doctor in India who, everyone's plant-based. They on average eat 3 kilos of meat per person per year, right? That's me at lunch generally. And so or
somebody eating the Eat Lancet guidelines.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And he's treating people at younger and younger ages for these massive burden of chronic diseases and the sequelae that comes from these chronic diseases and this burden. And he says it's absolutely rampant. He was saying that they have a 30% diagnosed diabetes rate, which is 3 times higher than America. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys.
So I have 2,000 employees in India, and been going backwards and forwards there since 2004. And nobody was talking about poor health when I went on visits back then. Everybody looked fine. In just 20 years, the only conversation I have with my employees, I run a jewelry factory, the only conversation I want to talk about on there is diabetes, uncle's just got cancer, auntie's just had a heart attack. And they're frightened because it's happened so quickly over there. I mean, I've got a slightly different view on that. I'm sure the meat plate's part of it. I think that they've been okay on this massive high-carb diet for so long, but then when you put the westernized shit over the top of it, so now you're hitting them with fructose and glucose, I think the two together is...
Well, the thing is, though, is that they're plant-based, and all that crap is plant-based. Ruffles are plant-based. Oreo cookies are vegan, right? They're not only plant-based, but they're vegan. They're just everything perfect, right? So, I mean, if you just all lived on Oreo cookies and shot heroin, then we would just all be great. It's all plant-based stuff. So they're especially susceptible to this sort of, this sort of predatory marketing where they say, oh, look, this is all plant-based. And as long as it's plant-based, as long as it doesn't have meat, then it's okay for you, then it's good for you. And it's not going to cause heart disease because it doesn't have meat, it doesn't have fat, it doesn't have animal fat, and therefore it's good for you. That was the distinction that was made in the 1980s, was that cholesterol was bad for you, saturated fat increased cholesterol, and therefore anything without saturated fat and cholesterol were de facto good for you, which of course isn't true. I mean, things can be, there can be other things that are bad for you. Arsenic doesn't increase your cholesterol, but it's bad for you. And so they didn't look at that side of things. So even if cholesterol and saturated fat were bad for you, which they are not unequivocally, that doesn't mean that there aren't any other bad things out there. And that's the marketing ploy and scheme that has been used. They say, oh, as long as it's not this, be scared of this, and as long as it's not this, then everything's fine. Eat all of our garbage. And so they're certainly susceptible to that because they're eating plant-based. They're doing their vegetarian, traditional Indian diet, but they're getting really, really hurt by this. And that same doctor, the Dr. Ankur Verma, I just had him on my podcast. I'll be publishing that next week. Very interesting guy. Probably be interested in talking to him. He's carnivore, and he's seeing this, and he's trying to get his patients like, hey, you need to stop this traditional crap. You need to eat real food. And he's actually doing studies now looking at the patient population that's coming through his emergency department. And what they eat and what problems they're getting. And he was saying that he just treated a 26-year-old patient, traditional Indian plant-based high-carb diet, 26-year-old who had a stroke.
Wow.
And he treated a 17-year-old vegan boy who just had a heart attack.
Oh.
Okay, but we're not living long enough in the 1800s. I guess 17 wasn't long enough. And that always bugs me too. I mean, that whole thing is, we weren't living long enough. Guys, first of all, look up historical figures. Every single American founding father died in their 80s and 90s if they weren't killed by something.
Yeah, and I say go and look in the UK, go and walk around a graveyard, because you will find lots of gravestones from people that died 100 years ago that were in their 80s, in their 90s. Of course, you're going to have some, because we hadn't got antibiotics, we couldn't cure many diseases back then. So of course you're going to see quite a lot that are young, but you will still find the 80s, the 90s. You may even find a 100-year-old, maybe even a super centenarian in your local graveyard.
Yeah, and even without that, what was the minimum required age to run for president of the United States? 35.
Wow.
And that was a rule that came about in the 1700s.
Have you just doubled that recently for some reason
in
the States?
But that was the minimum, right?
Wow.
So if the minimum age to even apply for the job is 35, but everyone's dying in their 30s, that doesn't really make sense, does it?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have presidents that had 2 terms, crazy enough, and FDR had 4 terms. So if everyone's just dying in their 30s, that doesn't really hold water. So it's just false. I mean, and these are just people that don't even bother looking up the statistics, or don't even bother Googling historical figures and say, how old was Socrates when they killed him with a plant, right? Well, he was in his 70s, and no one in Plato or Aristotle talked about how he was just the oldest guy in history. It was just amazing. This is just the longest lived person ever. He was just a normal guy, right? And they had to kill him. He was so sharp and so with it. Alexander the Great, this is part of the historical record. He inherited an army from his father, Philip of Macedon, and some of these guys were in their 60s. The foot soldiers holding a 14-foot steel lance with a 5-foot long steel blade on it, 5 rows deep, so it was this porcupine sort of look to it, and other people had to go through that. It didn't go well. And so they had a 50-to-1 kill rate in a lot of these engagements. Wow. They took over the entire Mediterranean, North Africa, Greece, Turkey, and gone into India. They took over this massive, massive, massive empire in a matter of years, with guys ranging from in their 20s to in their 60s. And I read a book on this by Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, who's a fellow at the Hoover Institution over at Stanford. Really interesting guy. He's a classical historian, a military historian, and very interesting. And he actually wrote about this, and he mentioned those statistics specifically. And he also said that there was this general that Alexander the Great had, who led one of his wings of the cavalry. This was back when, if you were a leader, you led from the front. Mm-hmm. And so this guy was on a horse in full armor, swinging a sword, hacking people, 50-to-1 kill rate. And actually, he had a thousands to 0 kill rate probably because he was still alive. He was either 76 or 78.
Wow.
On a horse in battle in his late 70s. Right. So, no, actually, people are quite healthy. We know as geneticists, and this is what I was taught in my genetics training 24 years ago at the University of Washington in Seattle, which has they led the Human Genome Project, so we had some of the top geneticists in the world at that time. They were doing the Human Genome Project. And they told us that according to the length of our telomeres, we are genetically designed to live 120 years on average.
Wow.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, the Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special. Shouldn't have to do all the different tricks and the plunges and the medications and the resveratrol, which probably doesn't work anyway because that's the whole lawsuit for $700 million about
Is that right? I've not heard about
it was a con apparently. Well, that's the allegation that David Sinclair sold resveratrol to some big company for $700 million, and obviously made a killing on it, and they have never been able to reproduce his results that they bought his. This is why you duplicate things. Yeah. This is why any study worth its salt historically had to be independently verified in another lab in another setting. And now it's just like, oh, you publish that? Great, we'll take it. But we're seeing so many things being backtracked now. Even Alzheimer's said it's going to be these beta amyloid plaques, they build up, that's causing damage to the neurons and doesn't allow them to work. But I was always a bit skeptical of that anyway, because there were people that had no expression of Alzheimer's disease and they had a head full of these plaques, and they said, oh, well, they were keeping active. This lady was, reading the Bible every day, and that's what kept her brain going. Maybe, but it always seemed a bit weird. Now we know that the people that published that study, that paper saying that the beta amyloid plaques were the cause of Alzheimer's, fudged the numbers, fudged the data, and actually never showed that. Yeah. But they have tenure now, and you can't really get them. They've already published this landmark paper that's made them very, very famous, and now they're just dealing with the fallout and probably don't care too much because they've moved on.
Made their money already and run.
After agriculture, people got worse. That is very clear in the fossil record. Immediately after agriculture, not hundreds of years, not thousands of years. It wasn't a slow, progressive downfall. Immediately in the fossil record, you see severe disparity in both the height, health, and brain size of pre-agrarian and post-agrarian people, not only in one isolated case, but in every single place around the world that came to agriculture or had agriculture brought to them. Every single time, the height and health of the population declined.